Chapter 6, The Cat and Mouse Game, Dealing with Casino Countermeasures. Handling Baccarat negation as card counting is perfectly legal. Nevertheless, casinos have the right to refuse service to anyone. If casinos deem you a financial threat, they may very well back you off by informing you that you can't play blackjack there anymore. Roughly 100 hours into my card counting career, I was starting to feel offended that I hadn't yet been backed off. Don't they know I'm a winning player? Aren't I an impressive enough card counter? Don't get me wrong, I didn't want to get backed off. My heart rate would still rise every time the pit boss started watching me more closely than the other players. But I also wanted to get that first back off over with. I wanted my skills to be validated and I wanted to experience the dreaded tap on the shoulder, so I'd at least, and at last, know what it was like. Then one particularly blustery winter morning, it happened. I was playing at a small casino that offered particularly favorable rules during certain hours of the day. I'd been betting between $5 and 2 spots of $100, and after a couple hours, the pit boss spoke to me in a thick Russian accent. "No more blackjack," he said. "You can play the other casino games, but you're too good at blackjack for us." "What?" I replied, feigning deep offense. "What do you mean? I'm not allowed to play blackjack anymore? Seriously?" "But everyone else can play. You know what you're doing," he said. "Your game is good. No more blackjack for you." "Well, this isn't fair," I said. "Can I at least get a comp for some breakfast?" "Sure." "How's $25? My skills had finally been validated, but it was also sad to think that I couldn't play there again. It was like my card counting career had started with hundreds of places of employment and now I'd been fired from one of them. Since then, I've been backed off roughly 100 times. Sometimes from the same casino more than once. What follows are a few of my thoughts on back-offs in general. Try not to sweat it. It's never fun, of course, but generally it's really not that bad. Honestly, the anticipation tends to be much rougher than the actual event. Even after the thousands of hours I've played, I still experience jitters for the first few minutes after I sit down at a blackjack table. I always have and probably always will. But when the back-off is actually put into motion, it's generally just fine. After all, I have no intention of spending time in casinos outside of taking their money. I just move on to the next casino. That's not to say there aren't some casinos from which I was really bummed to get thrown out. It can be disappointing to no longer be able to beat their particular games and enjoy any perks like comped meals and hotel rooms. But getting worked up over it doesn't do anyone any good. If you know that the only thing to fear is fear itself, you can actually have some fun with it. The only time I was ever backroomed was with the Washington Youngbloods. We'd beaten a casino for a large amount and were stuck with $140,000 in chips to cash out. The casino didn't force us to go in the back room, but they said they wouldn't cash out our chips unless we explained to them how we'd been cheating them. We followed the casino staff into a white room with computers, a long table, and waiting security guards. They asked us how we won so much, while checking every $500 chip under a black light to make sure it wasn't fraudulent. While we explained that we didn't cheat, but were card counters, the head honcho asked, "How do you know what to bet?" In classic Sammy fashion, he replied with a smirk, "I'll gladly tell you a broken bar for a consulting fee," rubbing his thumbs and fingers together. Don't let it rattle you. The worst thing that can happen in anticipation of an impending back off is for those jitters to affect the way you play. If you let the fear affect your game, you've already let the casino win. Some of the best advice I ever received is, control the things you can control and don't worry about things you can't. You can manage the quality and aggressiveness of your game, so stick to it. Play in a way to get their money, whether or not the dreaded tap ever comes. As I mentioned earlier, counter and author Josh Axelrod advises, don't back yourself off. If you avoid casinos or make excessive changes to your betting or playing strategy just so the casino won't detect what you're doing, you've effectively done their job for them and backed yourself off from playing a winning game. Force the casino to make the decision about whether you play or not. My friend and $1 million card counter Loudon often is a regular guest speaker at our blackjack boot camps. When asked how he handles the fear of back-offs, he says, "Instead of being afraid of back-offs, I think, how quickly can you do it? Mother fears." Rather than cowering in fear, often has turned the cat and mouse into a game, daring the casinos to stop him. When they finally do, he simply moves on, daring the next one in line to do the same. To show people what it's actually like, I filmed undercover footage of it happening to me. This took place at a local casino I knew would be quick to reject my action. At this point I was a known threat in the Seattle area, and I bet in a way that would be pretty obvious to the casino. It didn't take more than 20 minutes before I was approached by the pit boss. The video ended up going viral several times over a 5-year period, exposing the fact that card counting is real and demonstrating that casinos want only losing players at the table. If you want to watch the whole scene to see how unintimidating a back-off should be, you can watch it here, youtube.com/watch. V equals 6HJWZ click. Be thankful that casinos can back you. Irises negation not. If you can't tell already, I dislike casinos a lot. But moaning and blaming casinos for the fact that they can tell card counters they can't play blackjack is unproductive. I would argue that we should take it in stride. In some ways, I'm even glad casinos can kick us out, or at least use countermeasures like they do in Atlantic City that effectively back us off. Okay, before you freak out and start thinking I'm getting paid by the evil casinos to suggest such a thing, hear me out. If casinos couldn't prevent you from playing blackjack and had to let card counters sit there hour after hour and day after day beating them, it wouldn't be long before they changed the rules so that card counting was ineffective. They'd either cut too many cards off to make card counting unviable, or exclusively use continuous shuffling machines, or make the payouts so bad that card counting wouldn't be worth the time, or worse. But because casinos can limit their exposure to players who they determine are a threat, the game has remained beatable after all this time. And I'd much rather have to deal with the cat and mouse game of trying to avoid detection than not be able to make money as a card counter. As I expressed at the beginning of this chapter, the back-ifs aren't that bad. They say no more, you say no problem, and that's usually the end of it. Of course, there are levels, and the hassles and consequences escalate when things advance to trespassing. A boss or security reads you a notice informing that, in no uncertain terms, if you return to the casino you'll be arrested, or backrooming, you're physically detained. In reality, the more serious levels aren't often reached, as can be seen in this record kept by our most aggressive BJA pro, Joe. Avoid being combative. I used to put up a stink. I've long since learned that it only exacerbates the situation. I now tend to say something along the lines of, oh, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't do anything wrong. Now you and I know I didn't do anything wrong. But I've come to realize that the pit boss or table games manager is usually just as scared or stressed out as the player when it happens. If you respond defensively, they tend to get more combative, which gets you nowhere. And honestly, for the sake of the next card counter, I want their experiences with us to be positive. So even though I know I'm in the right, I feel like the more gracious I can be, the better. I once sat in a car outside a casino while my teammate and the casino's head of surveillance cussed each other out in the parking lot. I could only think, what the heck is going on here? Engaging in combative arguments with casino staff won't compel them to let you back into play. More than that, it will likely give rise to countermeasures, like sharing your info with other casinos, and it's likely to exacerbate their bias against card counters. Years later, we ended up befriending that very head of surveillance, and she said the thrill of trying to catch our blackjack team was the highlight of her week. Fortunately, just like my teammate, she didn't actually have any animosity toward us. She just got caught up in the moment. I imagine most casino personnel aren't as gracious. So while I believe we stand on the moral high ground, I still think it's in our best interest to treat casino personnel no differently than we want to be treated in that situation. Know your rights. A month after teaming up with Sammy, we planned a 5-day trip to the Midwest that involved high-stakes blackjack starting in the Chicago area. By day 2, we'd been bounced from a few casinos and suspected that we'd been flyered to the other local casinos. Still, we took our chances at a nearby casino, rather than driving to an entirely new location. We were employing team play, with spotters playing low stakes at tables, then signaling and the big player, who swooped in and bet high stakes during advantageous counts. I was one of the spotters, playing $10 a hand waiting for the table to heat up before alerting the BP. Within about 30 minutes, something was going on with the big player and I received a signal that I should just go ahead and bet the table myself. Since I had a true 2, I bought in for $2,000. The moment I did that, the pit boss came by and said, "Shuffle on him." The jig was up. They knew who we were and it was time to get out of there. I took my $2,000 in chips and hurried to the cashier's cage. The unfriendly middle-aged lady at the window was stacking my chips when her phone rang. After 15 seconds on the phone, she hung up and informed me that she needed my ID to cash out my chips. They didn't do this in Seattle unless it was over $10,000. But I didn't know the rules in Indiana and, to be honest, I just wanted to get out of there. I handed her my ID. She took it, turned around, and put it on a scanner, before handing it back to me. Soon after, I learned that I'd been put into a database of card counters. The cashier had lied to me about needing my ID, which still gets my goat. But I made the mistake of not knowing my rights beforehand and fell for her ploy. Let me contrast this with a more recent story. While on a family road trip, I wanted to check out some casinos I'd never played before. First, I sat down at a high-limit double-deck table for a few hours. I was up a few $1,000s when it was time to go to dinner. After tucking my kids in bed, I headed back to the casino to generate some more rev. But things were different on the floor this second go-round. When I approached the high-limit room, the phone immediately started ringing. Before I could even place one bet, I was approached by a suit and 2 security guards asking if they could have a word with me. I grabbed my chips and followed. Pro tip: Never leave your chips at the table if you suspect you're getting backed off. We weaved through the entire casino floor when a man burst out of an unmarked white door. Furious casino manager, you're coming with me. Pointing at the unmarked door. Me, no, that's okay. I'm going to stay right here. Furious casino manager, steam coming from his ears. Are you trying to tell me you're not counting cards? Me, no, you're right. I am counting cards. Furious casino manager, taking his volume up a notch. Are you trying to tell me you're not Colin Jones? Me, no, I am Colin Jones. Furious casino manager, in his most incredulous tone yet, are you gonna tell me this isn't your website? Question mark. He opened up a folder he'd been holding the whole time, then showed me a printout of blackjackapprenticeship.com. Me, now seriously impressed, but cautious not to be smug. No, you're right. That's my website. Casino manager, screaming, I want my money back. Me, no, I'd like to cash out and leave. This was not going according to plan for him. I'm sure he imagined that he could corner me in the back room where I'd lose all leverage and or he'd catch me in a lie. But I knew my rights. Casinos can demand that you go into a back room if you're not suspected of illegal activity. Furthermore, I wanted to stay in the well-populated parts of the casino with plenty of old ladies at slot machines and cameras recording the interaction. What could he really demand from me when I was calm, collected, and in clear view of lots of other patrons? If he laid a finger on me, both the cameras and bystanders would see it and I'd likely land a six-figure settlement for assault. And he knew it. He didn't catch me in a lie, not that it matters. I was honest and non-combative, but stood up for my rights. Casino manager, you think you can come into my house and count cards and take my money? Me, I'd like to cash out and leave. Casino manager, you need to give me your ID. Me, no, I would just like to cash out and leave. Casino manager steams for another minute, pacing, then turns to the security guards. You're going to take him to the cashier's cage. I want him to cash out and leave. 10 years earlier, I was intimidated by the lady at the cashier's cage and when she demanded my ID, I caved. Since then, I learned my rights, so I could confidently stand up to the most irate casino boss I've ever encountered. Thus, he had no recourse. He had to let me go with the money. As you can probably gather by now, you too need to know your rights, which often allow that you can refuse to produce ID. I recommend the book The Law for Gamblers, by Robert Nerston. Bob is a Las Vegas lawyer who has taken, and won, cases for the instances when casinos overstep the law. Though admittedly rare, Bob has made a very good living representing advantage players against casinos. If things go sideways in the tens of thousands of hours my teams and friends have played blackjack, things have gone sideways on several occasions. Once, a situation got more than a little hairy for me. I found myself being handcuffed 20 feet from the front door while a police officer emptied $60,000 from my pockets and inquired as to my criminal history. Here's what happened. I was playing at a tribal casino with a teammate when the casino asked for his ID. He handed it over, thinking it was because he'd reached the $10,000 threshold for a cash transaction report, a routine and legally required exchange of information. But when the casino staff walked away with it, he lost his cool. He grabbed his phone and said, "Give me my ID back or I'm calling the cops." When the casino didn't blink, my teammate called 911, claiming that his ID had been stolen and the perpetrator wouldn't give it back. The casino photocopied his ID and returned it. Since I hadn't raised a fuss, the casino didn't even demand mine. We were both backed off and after being cashed out, we were free to leave. On the way out, I stopped at the men's room. When I came out, a police officer was standing there. The casino had changed its tune. It told the cop that I was the person in question, so the cop assumed I had stolen someone's ID. When the casino employee said he wanted to see my ID, the police officer just handed it to him, assuming I was the one in the wrong. Looking me up in his database, he saw that my record was clean. He asked me a dozen questions before returning my cash and ID. I rushed to the rental car where my teammate was waiting and muttered a sarcastic, "Thanks a lot." Amazingly, the police officer circled back before we could exit the parking lot to ask one more question. "Can you teach me how to count cards?" We had just started blackjack apprenticeship, so I told him how to find it online and we were on our way. Aside from an excuse to share my sketchiest story, what was the point of telling you this? The point is that when the police get involved, do whatever they say. Since you're in the right, with a little bit of patience, it usually gets sorted out. You don't want to be defiant to the police. If the police or the casino violate your rights, call Bob Nerston immediately. Handling casino heat on the same trip in which the cage lady got me to surrender my ID under false pretenses, we played 2 riverboat casinos in Gary, Indiana. Rather than using team play, we split up, 2 to a casino, and attacked individually. Sammy and I headed to a Miristar, where he hit the high-limit room that had some favorable rules. I stuck to the main floor. There were so many tables on the main floor that, rather than sit at one table and play, I backcounted and wonged in at any count above true 1.5. One particular table seemed to continually get to positive counts, so I kept jumping into it, then sitting out again if the true count dropped below 1. To anyone who knows anything about card counting, this seems like it would be the most obvious thing in the world. 23-year-old kid stands behind tables, waits for a while, then jumps in betting hundreds or thousands of dollars. But it was the best way to generate have. This opportunity was the reason we'd flown halfway across the country, so I just went for it. Even the two half-drunk guys sitting at the table started to notice. After 30 minutes of me jumping in and out of their game, eventually one of the guys said to his buddy, "Hey, I think we've got some MIT shit going on over here. Look at this kid. I think he's doing that MIT shit." It was obvious from his tone that I hadn't offended him. He was loving it, but wouldn't shut up about it. The next time I bet 2 spots of $1,000, the dealer yelled out "Checks play." And a tall 40-something female pit boss came over and okayed the dealer. The half-drunk guy turned to the pit boss and said, "Hey, I think this boy is doing some MIT shit over here." He waits a while, then jumps in when the cards are good, then leaves. Great. This guy just blew my cover. Thanks, buddy. But the pit boss only shrugged her shoulders and headed over to another table where a different dealer was calling for her attention. I never got backed off that session and only had to leave when our team called it a night. Entire books have been written about handling casino heat, but I've found it's difficult to gauge, since it's so subjective. Should I have left the casino the moment the guys at the table started calling me MIT? Or did I feel self-justified because I didn't get backed off that session? Was that the session that got us flyer to the other Indiana casinos? Honestly, unless you've got someone on the inside who can tell you exactly what the casinos are thinking, you'll never know. The casinos have a habit of being consistently inconsistent. But that doesn't mean that there aren't principles we can follow when it comes to casino heat. Trying to preserve your local joint. You can share sheep many times, but you can only skin it once. Of the $600,000 I've won in my career, $150,000 of it came at one casino. Grace and I called that casino our kids' college fund. It had an average game, but it was extremely tolerant. That's not to say no one ever got backed off there, but back then, it took a lot for them to give you the boot. Having a place nearby at which I could regularly generate EV made it worth keeping available as an option. That doesn't mean I used betting cover or cover plays. On the contrary, I played aggressively. But I did take periodic breaks from the casino if I was up a large amount in a short period of time or if I was experiencing a lot of heat. Typically, the two went hand in hand. If I was up a certain amount, or phones were ringing off the hook, or pit bosses were telling dealers to cut the shoe a bit bigger, thus making the deck penetration worse, I got up for a while or called it a night. If you have a local place, it can be worth treading a little more lightly there to maintain longevity. The fact that there are no travel expenses to get there makes a local place better to shear, rather than skin. Still, all good things come to an end. When the local place eventually does cashier you, as my local gold mine eventually did, take it in stride and move on to the next casino. Non-local shops we got good play in at the start, but as our first major cross-country trip continued, it quickly became clear that we indeed had been flyer to all the casinos in the Indiana area. We drove 2 hours to a new casino and even before raising our bets, the dealers shuffled on us. We then took our trip a bit farther north than we'd originally planned, to Potawatomi Casino in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. For 2 days we played unimpeded, myself as a big player, bouncing from table to table, while Ben, Jeff, and Sammy spotted, signaling me into a table when the count was over a true 1.5. In the early evening of our second day, we started getting heat. A pit boss showed up at every table to which I was getting called. And he didn't just watch. He took the cards out of the discard tray and thumbed through them. We tried to stay calm, but we all knew what he was doing. He was counting through the cards to see if I was playing only positive shoes. Exactly what I was doing, of course. Sammy gave the signal to end the session. After cashing out, we met up at our rental car to talk about our plan. Not wanting to get backed off, we headed back to our hotel at 6 p.m., sat around all evening, then flew home the next morning, saving Potawatomi for a future trip. Now it might sound like we made a rational decision, but consider this. Are we really going to fly all the way back to Milwaukee to try to play again at one isolated location where we were already getting heat? No way. The risk is way too high to justify plane tickets, rental car, and hotel expenses. What should we have done? We should have kept playing. Then, one of two things would have happened. We would have been shown the door, in which case we would have known we were done there and could at least cross it off our list of potential places to visit, for the time being, or we wouldn't have been backed off and could have continued to generate have. If they backed us off, so be it. If they didn't, great. But instead, we backed ourselves off. A few years later, we found out from another professional card counter that Potawatomi Casino had a policy at the time of allowing card counters to play there until they'd won $100,000. They verified that you were a card counter, as the pit boss was doing, and even commented on the count system you were using. But they didn't back you off until you hit 6 figures. So we could have continued to play all night, perhaps even coming back for several more trips, if we hadn't prematurely done their work for them. Needless to say, I recommend a very aggressive approach at any casinos that aren't in your backyard. Even if you do get kicked out, you can usually return to most casinos a year or two later and try them again. My friend and professional card counter Spartan lives in Las Vegas. I recently overheard someone ask him, "How long do you wait after a back-off before returning to the same casino?" "In Vegas, I just wait for the next shift." The bottom line is, you never know what casinos are going to do. You've got to go find out for yourself. A year after the Wisconsin play, the Washington Youngbloods team made a trip to Arizona, our second to the region in the space of a few months. We'd mostly been splitting up, 2 per casino, and spreading aggressively. On day 3, however, we went to a new casino and attacked it with team play. Unfortunately, after a sloppy situation, the casino was onto us and our big player got backed off. After dinner, we headed back to the original 2 casinos to play until we got backed off. The moment I approached a blackjack table, chips in hand, 2 pit bosses started pointing and whispering. I could see them huddled at the table in the pit, looking at a piece of paper. I scooted to a different pit, only to see the printed out paper. They must have been looking at a flyer with all 4 of our pictures printed on it. Great. We've been flyered. I was just starting to like this place. Oh well, I might as well do what I'm here to do until they tell me I no longer can. The report on me below is typical of what's distributed. Identifying names have been redacted to protect the guilty. I sat at a table and started playing. The pit boss looked at me, looked at the picture, started talking to another pit boss about me, and nothing happened. I finished at the shoe, another profitable one at that, and called Sammy to see how it was going at his casino. "Yeah, they've got our flyers in every pit over here, too, but they seem to be letting us play. Just keep going and let's see what happens." We each played unimpeded for several more hours, finally stopping of our own volition after meeting and exceeding our bankroll goal with a flight to catch. Only when we cashed out were we confronted by the bosses. But that was after winning a collective $80,000. We never would have won had we not continued playing after becoming aware of the flyers. We'd learned our lesson from Potawatomi. Just because you're getting heat doesn't mean you're about to get evicted. Especially if you are at an out-of-town location, you might as well keep playing. It's better by far than backing yourself off. Employing cover. Card counting sounds great, but I don't know about all this a heat and a back off business. Just tell me how to play so that I can make money, but never get backed off. That, my friends, is what we call a white whale. You just have to get over the idea that you can employ some magical way of playing, betting, or acting that will allow you to win endless amounts of money without any scrutiny from the casinos. That's why the sections on cover and camouflage appear in this book after those on getting backed off and handling heat. Yes, some forms of cover can buy you time, but in the end, as I've mentioned several times, you have to play in a way that gets the casinos money, and that will, at some point, attract their attention and involve taps on the shoulder. So please raise your right hand and say, "I understand that beating casinos for money involves being confronted by bosses and security. I still choose to generate positive EV and fear no casino countermeasures." Okay, now that we're on the same page, let's talk about the 3 forms of cover that can be employed in the casinos. Playing camouflage. At a church team meeting in 2007, I overheard 2 of our players having a discussion about avoiding heat at casinos. I feel like splitting tens is the playing deviation that causes pit bosses to freak out the most. John said, "They know it's a card counter thing to do." Well, what I like to do is occasionally split tens against a 4, 5, or 6 during a negative count. Detroit Mike responded, "So casinos don't give me heat when it's time to split tens during a high count." Oh, that's a good idea. My blood pressure immediately shot up. Do they have any idea how expensive it is to split tens during a negative count? It must cost them 3 times as much EV as they make from splitting tens when their deviation chart calls for it. I quickly corrected them, letting them know that no amount of cover justifies a mistake like splitting tens during a negative count. We just covered this in some detail. Playing like a card counter eventually brings undesired heat, but most playing mistakes cost a lot more than you might think. I remember getting chewed out by Sammy during our first big player trip when, while spotting for him at a really high count, I was going to stand on an 11 to conserve cards for him. The BP: the cost in EV of standing on an 11 against a 6, even with your $25 bet, is more than the EV of my $500 bet. Don't do that. Unfortunately, newer card counters don't realize just how small our edge is and how important our playing decisions are. So if you're thinking, "I'll just make some A mistakes at times so they don't think I'm a card counter," please be aware that you will very quickly lose your edge. That said, not all playing decisions have the same cost associated with them. In burning the tables in Las Vegas, Ian Anderson describes a series of playing mistakes he employed that came at a very small cost. They include, always ensuring a blackjack, always standing on hard 16 versus 10, always doubling down with 11, always doubling down with 10, always doubling down on 9 versus 2, always standing on neck, 7 versus 9, 10, and ace, always standing on 12 versus 3. He crunched the numbers and found that it cost him only $13.25 per hour per $100 unit. Therefore, the cover was worth the cost. I have two concerns with this. First, in today's game, giving up 13% of your profits just makes the margin that much smaller. If you've played professional blackjack for any length of time, you realize that it's just too high a cost to give up that amount. Not all Anderson's cover plays have the same cost, but when you combine all of them, it really is giving up a lot of EV. And second, I think it's rare that casinos are smart enough to catch these mistakes and determine that you're not a card counter. I once had a surveillance employee turned card counter contact me through blackjack apprenticeship. He said, "I watched you and Ben play a long time ago, but I determined that you weren't card counters, because you didn't follow basic strategy. I now know that it was because you were using playing deviations, but I didn't even know about playing deviations back then. So by playing perfectly, with no cover, we fooled surveillance into thinking we weren't card counters." My point is, in a cost-benefit ratio, playing mistakes rarely provide enough financial benefit. In my experience, a lot of card counters hurt themselves by losing out on EV by using cover plays. Andrew Uile, a Las Vegas pit boss and former card counter, confirmed my experience by blogging, "One measure that I believe too many players use too much of is cover plays. Playing a hand differently than you should while the supervisor is watching you, in my humble opinion, is a waste of money. I've watched many players do this. It has no impact on my determination, or surveillances, of whether or not someone is playing with an edge." Uile goes into such subjects in depth in his book The Blackjack Insider, so how to pit bosses beat the casinos at their own game. Granted, I have a better understanding of the game than most supervisors. This is a further demonstration of my point. Actually, most supervisors know nothing about actual card counting, so they won't know it's a cover play. The very few supervisors who do know how to count won't be swayed by your cover plays, as they've likely seen you play enough other hands to know what's going on. From either angle, cover plays are simply an unnecessary hit to your bottom line. Betting camouflage. At this point, it should be clear that there's one way to use card counting to beat blackjack: betting less when the casino has the advantage and betting more when the player has the advantage. Given enough time, a well-trained casino supervisor will detect this. So some players try to camouflage their bets, a second form of cover. If betting from $10 to $150, a 1A15 bet spread, tips off the casinos, what if I just bet from $10 to $100, 1A10 bet spread? I get some variation of this question at every blackjack bootcamp. Unfortunately, it doesn't exactly work that way. I've been ejected using a 1A3 bet spread, and showing a net loss playing at that casino, and played for hundreds of hours at a casino using a 1A140 bet spread, winning $150,000 over 3 years. I don't think surveillance workers are sitting around tabulating your exact bet spread and saying to a coworker, "Phew, he's only using a 1 to 8, so we don't need to worry about him." I believe it has more to do with whether you're on their radar or not. If you are, they'll look at how your bets, and playing decisions, change and determine whether they deem you a threat or not. And since our profit as counters primarily comes from betting more when we have the edge and less when the casino has the edge, I'd be cautious about costing yourself money just to try to fly under the casino's radar. There are always exceptions, but as with playing cover, make sure it's a sound business trade-off to sacrifice short-term profit in favor of longevity in the casino. Interestingly, flying under the radar is a term used for a form of camouflage that results from playing at a table with a player, or players, betting more than you. Since the biggest action tends to draw the most scrutiny, or all of it, this can be a desirable situation to be in. If you want to intentionally seek out tables with bigger action, be aware that more players means fewer hands per hour, so there's an associated cost for playing with others. If you determine that the cover value outweighs this consideration, then go ahead. Or just be aware of the benefit when it happens naturally at times that there are no options to play with fewer players anyway. Betting cover. What about the betting camouflage described by Ian Anderson? In Anderson's Burning the Tables in Las Vegas, he describes a form of betting camouflage that will throw the casinos off your scent. It involves raising your bets by 1 unit only when you've won the previous hand, assuming the count warrants it, and lowering your bets by 1 unit only when you've lost the previous hand, assuming the count warrants it. Anderson claims success with this in the 1980s and 1990s, and I don't doubt it. However, the high-limit games back then were more favorable. For a deck, dealer stands on all 17s, resplit aces, and surrender. With only one deck cut off, I would argue that the cost of this form of betting camouflage is simply not worth it today. On my second trip to Las Vegas, I employed Anderson's ultimate gambit, which included all of his cover plays, affordable mistakes, and cover betting. I walked boldly, from the sidewalk to the front door at least, into the London Club, a high-limit room upstairs at the Aladdin, now Planet Hollywood. I ordered a scotch, I hate scotch, and began firing away, from 2 spots of $100 up to 2 spots of $2,000. The first shoe had an insane count, but I followed the strategy of raising my bets by 1 unit when I'd won the previous round. This meant it took a while to get up to my max bets, but I just couldn't lose a hand. 20 minutes later, I was up $23,000 when the shoe finally ended. Before we even began the second shoe, the pit boss said, "I'm going to have to ask you to be done here." I couldn't believe it. Here I'd used all this camouflage and they still were showing me the door. However, I also saw it from the London Club's point of view. A 24-year-old kid waltzes into a Las Vegas high-limit room betting $100 to $2,000 and is up more than $20,000 in minutes. They simply didn't want me playing there. Still, as I made the long walk out of the casino, all I could think about was the expected value I'd missed out on. I could have generated an extra $100 of EV if I'd played perfectly. It was the first and last time I tried the ultimate gambit. Just to be clear, it wasn't one bad experience that kept me from using elaborate betting cover like Anderson. It really has to do with how expensive that form of betting cover is, particularly how much it affects the long run. If you're giving up 40% of your edge, are you really sure that you'll last more than 40% longer at the tables? Would you give up 40% of your edge to last 50% longer? I wouldn't, because my goal isn't to play longer, but to make as much money as I can as quickly as possible. And when you consider that there's a very real risk of giving up 40% of your edge to last only 20% longer, or in my London Club experience, to not last any longer, my opinion is that it's a poor business decision. If you've read Burning the Tables in Las Vegas, you know that Anderson said his betting strategy allowed him to use an even larger bet spread, thus not giving up 40% of his EV. I don't doubt that this strategy worked for him at the time. However, in the experience of my teams and friends in today's blackjack world, this kind of betting cover doesn't seem to affect your longevity one way or the other. It just costs you EV. Trigger points versus bet spreads. Commenting on bet spreads and box ifs, Tommy Highland suggests that the actual bet spread seems to matter less than the amounts you're betting. For example, does it really affect them all that much if you're spreading from $25 to $500 as opposed to $50 to $500? Sure, the bet spread is double, but it won't bring double the scrutiny. Of course, there's a point at which a bet spread will attract attention. Going from $5 to $10,000 looks ridiculous and will almost assuredly get you on the radar. In my years of playing, running teams, and consulting with professional card counters, this has been my experience as well. Rather than caring about the exact bet spread, casinos seem to have trigger points that raise their eyebrows. The points change from casino to casino, but a few of them include black action, $500 bets, $1,000 bets, and table max bets. Bellagio generally won't care about your black chips or $500 bets, but El Cortez in downtown Las Vegas certainly will, even if they change or are unpredictable. Every casino has a trigger point, whether identified by your betting patterns, betting volume, or how much you're winning. Trigger points in the field. At one casino, members of the church team began getting extra scrutiny at the $500 level. When someone put out 5 black chips, the dealer yelled out, "Table max." That resulted in the pit boss coming over and sometimes alerting surveillance. After a few team members found themselves unceremoniously dumped in the parking lot, I advised other members to avoid $500 bets and instead to just bet up to 2 spots of $400 or even $450. When they did, there was much less scrutiny. However, I reiterate, if the casino doesn't seem to care, you shouldn't worry about limiting your betting at all. You don't need to start playing at table max, but if there's no heat after an hour, consider pushing things a little further to extract even more of. I once played a casino in the middle of nowhere that let me spread from a single $50 bet to 3 spots of $1,000 at its 8-deck game for 4 days straight. I specifically chose the 8-deck because the casino's double deck was known for being sweaty and its 6-deck had side bets that slowed down the rounds per hour, while the 8-deck was heads up, giving me way more EV. I was the only player betting anything close to $1,000, and after 4 days, I was up over $40,000. In my last big shoe, the dealer ran out of chips and the pit boss wrote me an IOU on a sticky note. There was literally no heat, so I definitely wasn't going to limit my betting. I had to go to the host's office and ask for envelopes to hold all the cash. Even though I'd been staying there, eating in the gourmet restaurant, and betting multiple spots of table max all week, the casino marketing department didn't even know who I was. If a casino is run that poorly, There's no sense in limiting your bets and costing yourself what constitutes too much betting. So here we have two examples, one of limiting bets for longevity and another of not bothering because the casino just doesn't care. You may be wondering if there's some point at which you're betting too much, and if so, what it is. In my experience, there's no right answer. You can see card counters at any level, from hobbyist to full-time pro, having success and becoming persona non grata all over the country. Teams like the Greeks fearlessly blasted away at the casinos. At some, they were backed off, while others let them play high limits. There are also what I call the 2x900 people who bet big, but try not to bet too big, as some successes mixed with 86s. I recently read The Blackjack Life by Nathaniel Tilton. He and his teammate created some highly creative forms of cover that again elicited the hellos and goodbyes. My best advice is to think through what kind of card counter you want to be, calculate both your EV and the cost of any kind of cover you might want to employ, then decide if it fits into your business plan. Just be aware that there's no objective right answer. Summing up, cover: is there ever a time that I'd recommend using a cover play? To me, a card counter's default setting is to fearlessly play perfect blackjack with no cover. I go after the casino's money. I don't give them an extra penny of my money. Like my friend Loudon, often, I challenge them to run me off. Many amateur card counters want to employ cover simply out of fear of heat, fear of confrontation, fear of losing their favorite casinos. But fear is a terrible reason to use cover, so make sure you check your motives. If you harbor fear, face it head on or you'll never be a profitable card counter. If, however, you're interested in employing cover, I recommend that a new card counter play 500 hours of cover-free blackjack before deciding if it's worth employing any form of cover plays. Then you'll have the foundation of fearless play and enough experience under your belt to decide if it's worth it to you to give the casinos any of your money by playing or betting camouflage. Maximizer versus optimizer. Assuming you have the resolve and experience as a fearless and aggressive card counter, whether or not you use cover comes down to the endless debate between optimizing and maximizing your style. Both terms were coined by Ian Anderson in Burning the Tables in Las Vegas. Anderson himself, as you might have realized, was an optimizer. He was more interested in longevity, milking the cow as opposed to slaughtering it for a one-time meat feast. I, of course, am a maximizer. I'm always looking to get as much money from the casino as quickly as possible and deal with any consequences if and when they happen. That was how I learned to play and how we trained members of the church team to play. More important, all the most profitable card counters I know play aggressively and fearlessly, with little to no cover. It's very easy to give away your edge to the casinos if you start employing cover. With a cover play here and a cover bet there, if you aren't careful, you're playing break-even blackjack, giving away your time and talents. And that's not what any of us are here for. But maybe you're counting cards as a hobby at your sole local casino and the last thing you want is to be barred. Or maybe your goal is to break even and simply enjoy the comps. Or perhaps I haven't persuaded you that maximizer is the way to go. All that's fine. If you want to go the full-on optimizer route, just make sure you calculate the cost and really think through the cost benefit of what you're giving up with your cover plays. Use a blackjack simulator like CV Data to calculate how you intend to play, and make sure you play exactly the way you simulated it, so that you enter the casino well aware of the levels of EV and risk that you decided on. For example, maybe you don't split tens in Las Vegas, home to the best game protection in the world. Or if the pit boss is staring you down, you ask him what he would do with a 16 against 10, then you follow his advice, whether it's the correct deviation or not. Or if you end a shoe with a large bet, say $500, and the pit boss is standing right there watching, you leave it out for the first bet of the new shoe, rather than pulling it back and replacing it with a $25 chip. The cost of one $500 bet is about $2.50 in EV. That's affordable if you do it once or twice an hour in an effort to throw the pit boss off your case. If you win the hand and the pit boss is still watching, maybe you leave it out there, giving up another $2.50. If you lose the hand, you can make an excuse. Wow, this shoe isn't starting out well. I better test the waters for a bit, then put $25 out. Then, if you still get backed off, you won't be thinking about the EV you gave up while you were playing. Tipping as cover. Tipping is one of the most emotionally charged debates related to card counting. People have very deep, even visceral, feelings when it comes to tipping. I'm one of them, and though I know a lot of people disagree with me, I thought it would be a mistake not to cover this topic. I see tipping in a restaurant as vastly different than tipping at the blackjack tables. I know the margins are razor thin at restaurants, and I honestly don't mind providing a generous tip for the service provided to me by the waiter or waitress at a restaurant or coffee shop. But at a casino, the bosses, owners, and shareholders are expecting to take as much of my money as they can, while at the same time have me compensate their dealers for the privilege. A Las Vegas Strip casino can easily net $1 million a day, but can't seem to pay their dealers a living wage, so that responsibility defaults to the patrons whom the casinos are fleecing. And most of those patrons, Not wanting to look like stiffs, reward the people who pitch playing cards with six-figure annual incomes. When I first read that the average dealer at the Wynn Casino makes over six figures a year, I started to feel a lot better about protecting my own bottom line rather than feeling guilty about not increasing the dealers. Players on the church team weren't allowed to tip with team money. That way, it forced them to think about whether tipping provided any form of cover or if it was simply done so they felt better. Sure, tipping feels good in a moment, but just like cover bets, it begs the question, does this really provide enough cover to be worth that feeling? For many amateur card counters, the pressure to tip can be too much to bear and they end up tipping away their edge. Let's say you're betting up to 2x $100 and generating $35 per hour in EV. With a bet spread like that, you'll have hourly swings within the $2,000 range. If you just won $2,000 in an hour, what would the dealer think an appropriate tip should be? $100? $200? Maybe they wouldn't scoff at you if you threw them a green $25 chip. But a 10% tip based on your EV for the hour is $3.50. If you throw them three $1 chips after winning $2,000, I guarantee the dealer won't think any more of you than if you just come up with an excuse to leave the table. We can debate the ethics, practicalities, and finances of tipping or not tipping until the cows come home. But the bottom line for a card counter is that it must work into your business plan. For that reason, I recommend tracking your tips, so you really understand what it's costing you. Heaven forbid you tip your edge away. Getting more than you give. Every Wednesday evening, I had worship band practice at 5 p.m. Midway Casino was located 10 minutes from the church, so I headed there at 2 p.m. to beat traffic and get in a playing session. The game was mediocre, but the people were really nice, so I used a common tactic. I asked the dealer to cut the shoe really thin, that is, great deck penetration. I usually said something like, "Can you cut it toward the back?" I do really well at the end of the shoe. For what it's worth, it wasn't a lie, since the most valuable part of the shoe is the deeper you get into it. To encourage them to do this, I tipped $5 when they obliged. I knew that half deck was worth an extra $25 to me for that shoe. Well, the dealers at this casino nearly always obliged. And since they took turns being the pit boss, after a while, I even had the acting boss coming up to the dealer during the shuffle and say, "Cut the shoe at the back." Colin likes the end of the shoe. It was glorious. Midway went bust after about a year. I'm sure I didn't put them out of business, but I like to think that my wins contributed to their early demise. Free cover. Beyond Ian Anderson's philosophy of the KISS system, keep it simple, stupid, his views on casino interactions were absolutely groundbreaking when I read them. While many other books I read were brilliant at explaining the math and the how-to behind blackjack, Burning the Tables in Las Vegas was brilliant at diving into the psychology of being a professional card counter. As I've said, I don't recommend much of his playing or betting cover to the modern card counter. However, his thoughts on what I call free cover have impacted my approach to blackjack ever since. Last I looked, you could buy used Burning the Tables in Las Vegas on Amazon for $9.99 for the Kindle edition and $12.95 for the hardcover at LasVegasAdvisor.com/shoplva. So far, every form of cover we've discussed comes at a cost, but free cover is my preferred form. Obviously, it doesn't cost you a dime. Beyond that, I generally find it to be more effective. Free cover involves how you act or handle yourself in a casino, what Anderson calls comportment. Between my own experience and the tens of thousands of hours of blackjack played by my friends, teammates, and blackjack apprenticeship grads, we've tried many different things. In Holy Rollers, you can see various disguises we wore, but to be honest, most of that was driven more by entertaining one another than throwing the casino off our scent. I once even heard of a guy on a major blackjack team who mumbled, drooled, and shouted randomly at the tables to appear like someone who couldn't possibly be a card counter. The goal is for the casino to be compelled to let you play longer based on their perception of and experience dealing to and with you. Allow me to illustrate a few of the most common measures that can be taken to gain free cover. Your appearance. It can be effective to change your appearance from time to time, either growing out your hair or beard or altering your look in general. One member of the church team even went through the process of legally changing his name twice. Those are all personal decisions and their effectiveness can be debated ad nauseum. My advice is to be careful before you go out and spend a bunch of money on something like a custom-tailored suit or a Rolex. It's highly unlikely that the cover will justify the cost. If you spend any time in casinos, you know that a high roller can be a fat-bellied cigar-chomping bail bondsman from Hoboken in a stained and ripped t-shirt and plaid Bermuda shorts as easily as a tan, buff, sharp-dressed Manhattan investment banker in Gucci and Cartier. Over my career, I've played high-limit rooms in everything from designer fashions to tank tops and cut-off shorts. Either can be effective, depending on the casino's perception of you. Do you look and carry yourself like someone who might be betting the way you are? My friend Loudon often was the king of different looks. He headed out for his first night in Las Vegas dressed as a grizzled 30-something beer truck driver. At shift change, He shaved some of his facial hair and hit all the same casinos again, this time looking like a 40-plus stodgy accountant with a goatee. Another shift change, another character change, a 20-something with a street flair jersey and a lower-end mustache. He called that character Gay Fed. New shift, new character, all achieved with a carry-on full of different shirts, hats, and eyewear. I tend not to put too much thought or effort into my appearance, but I always get a kick out of players who do. You can see a few of Loudon's and my looks in the photos displayed over the next few pages. Bear truck in, Loudon, Vegas tourist, while spotting for a BP. K-Fed, sensible dad, Loudon. William H. Maybe, Loudon. Cornfed, Loudon. Accountant on holiday, Loudon. Mad Men, Loudon. Photo by John G. I. Dieris's negation coat. Cowboy had to borrow a suit coat while checking out a casino in Germany, the Cowdown Patriot, Loudon. Miscellaneous tactics if longevity is the goal. A few other tricks don't cost you much, if anything, and may be worth the trouble. For example, I once found a single deck game worth over $1,000 per hour. That meant every hand I played heads up was worth more than $10 in EV. As soon as I started betting big, I was asking the pit boss for any comp I could think of: a drink, a player's card, cigarettes. I don't smoke, but it kept him preoccupied for 5 minutes. By keeping him running around for a half hour, I generated $500 before he could even watch me play. I hit some positive variance and was up $20,000 before he knew what hit him and slipped away undetected. My wife bought a gaudy cubic zirconia at Target for $20, and she received endless compliments about her beautiful ring. It was a small cost to add to the casino's assumption that she was just another trophy wife of a husband with deep pockets enjoying some high-stakes blackjack while on vacation. Conversely, I strongly advise against drinking much, if any, alcohol when you play blackjack. You might order a single bottled beer, then refill it with water in the bathroom. I think card counters need to ask themselves what they're comfortable doing in a casino, whether changing appearance or comportment or forcing the casinos to deal with you as you are. Changing your look or act can be fun, assuming you have no ethical objections to chicanery, but for my preferred presentation, read on. Mimo T.I. Dieris's negation active cover. In my experience, the most effective way to handle yourself in a casino is to be personable and act like you belong there. While most casinos might expect a card counter to have his head down, hat low on his brow, and looking around like a shifty-eyed spy, I always try to look the dealer, pit boss, and floor supervisor in the eye. I smile, ask how they're doing, and thank them for whatever benevolence they bestow on me. One member of the church team told me that he'd learned these same skills in sales technique training. Needless to say, he lasted longer than some of our more squirrely team members. Being personable and comfortable in a casino does a few things. For one, it puts the casino employees at ease. It can be stressful for dealers, pit bosses, and floor supervisors when someone is betting big money, especially when he's winning big. But when you're likable and personable, it can really help keep them from being on edge. For another, the casino employees will actually want to be on your side. As I've shared before, casinos have a caricature of card counters as the bad guys. There's no better way to avoid that caricature than to have them like and root for you. Best of all, it can mitigate countermeasures. While backifs are inevitable, there's a huge difference between a mild request not to play any more blackjack and getting trespassed in or flyered to all the local casinos. I remember a trip with a teammate where we simultaneously got backed off and escorted to the cashier's cage. My teammate was right in front of me arguing and trying to fight. Myself, I apologized if they felt I'd done anything wrong. Then, while waiting in line at the cashier's cage, we began talking and joking around. When my teammate cashed out, they demanded his ID and photocopied it for their records. When it was my time to cash out, the casino manager said, "We're going to need your ID for our records." I said, "You know what? I'd really rather not." He thought for a moment, then said, "Okay, that's fine." They cashed me out and let me go on my way. Andrew Uile again confirms my experience. One thing you can do is be friendly. I'm not saying you have to be that guy at the table who hugs everyone and talks incessantly about teamwork, but smile and say hello to the dealer and the supervisor. Suspicions are less likely to rise if they like you. Maybe that sounds trivial. It isn't. It's always an instant red flag to me when I'm on the floor and someone keeps looking at me. People who are there to gamble and have fun aren't looking at the pit boss every other hand to check and see if they're being watched. This isn't true of every supervisor, but to a savvy floor, it's almost a dead giveaway that something is up. You might be wondering, is that really cover? It sounds more like just being a decent human being. If so, yes, you're totally right. After trying different hacks and attitudes, I realized I just wanted to follow my main conviction anyway, which is to treat others as I would want to be treated. It took me a few years to completely figure out that at the end of the day, I wanted to be a card counter on my own terms. So I'd simply be myself, friendly and approachable, and deal with the confrontations if and when they came. All card counters have to come to their own conclusions about what they're comfortable doing or not doing. For me, a smile and maybe a different hat are all the cover I tend to employ. High-stakes team play to part-time rollout and often. How did you get into card counting? I read online that the game could be beaten by keeping track of the cards. I snuck out of work early that same day to try it out. In spite of my foolish sprint to the tables, I scored an early win. A few days later, I proudly paid back a friend I owed money to with $100 bill, just so he would have to make inquiries. I casually let it drop that I'd been counting cards. "Oh, you must know Ben," he said. "He's in my Bible study. He counts cards too. He's won enough to buy a house." How many hours have you played and how much money have you won as a card counter? I've spent 2,600 hours at the tables and have won 800,000, which translates to a 300 an hour win rate. This primarily happened as a part of the church team. Early on in your career, you were labeled by a surveillance employee the most notorious card counter in America. How does someone still get in hours with a reputation like that? I learned to go without certain comps. I produce my ID only when the law requires it. With regard to the game, I got better at choosing advantageous situations, jumping in and out of shoes, distracting attention from my betting patterns. But I also played more brazenly. If it was just a matter of time before I was asked to leave, why not make it less notorious and more fun? Whereas I shrank from attention before, I started smiling, making eye contact, and trying to be a more genuinely kind and curious person with casino personnel. Then there were the disguises. I created characters to alter my look from one shift to the next. I was good at styling myself to look much younger or much older, mostly with jackets, shirts, hats, and accessories. What's the favorite character you've created? A character I call my dad. Promise Keeper's vest, flooded khakis, tube socks, running shoes, white hat with Republican logo, and reading glasses. Can you still play blackjack or are you banned everywhere? Yes to both. I've been back to Oidiaris's negation mostly everywhere and those are the same places I still play. There's turnover, they forget about me, or they're less attentive because my playing style is less familiar or egregious. I don't play in the same high-stakes full-time way. I've turned my play into an investment pastime. After so many hours, have you gotten sick of playing? Not yet. I'll let you know, but I don't think it's ever going to change. I like to beat the game in the present tense. The stories are fun, but they're past. Dreaming of big wins is fun, but that's future. I like the present, the hunt for playable games, the discovery, the counting in anticipation of raising bets, beating the house, cashing out, and doing it again at the next place. What's your favorite thing about being a card counter? The tiny particulars and mundane practices perfectly arranged and repeated over time to form a long track record of steady mastery over megalith corporations of gain, such that they fear me, but cannot stop me.